Okay, just took care of turn number 14, and finally, some positive news for the Allies, although it wasn't all good. So, first on the Eastern Front, so Germany, seeing that the both the Americans and the British had been buying transports the last couple turns and ground units, figured a invasion by the combined American and British forces was coming. So the Germans spent all their money in Western Europe this turn. So they dropped 5 fighters down in West Germany and then 8 mechanized in Bavaria. So they wanted to be able to counterattack any potential landing from the Allies in Europe. And pretty much all their money they did spend in the West, which was good news for Russia, kind of diverted some attention away. Now, Germany did take a bunch of territory, Smolensk. They took Lithuania back. They moved down into southern Russia, and they had taken Kursk. They were right at the doorstep to Moscow. And in Kursk, they still had 11 total artillery pieces, 3 medium armor, and I think a half a dozen mechs sitting right at the doorstep to Moscow. So Russia had no choice. They had to come out from Moscow. They came out with 5 infantry, about a half a dozen mechs, 2 fighters, and 15 medium armor, and they wiped out the Germans there. The 2 fighters went back to Moscow, and I believe 14 of the medium armor survived. So for now, the Russians have Moscow blocked off from Germany being able to reach them this turn. And that did take significant forces away from Germany. Not that Germany has a lot of ground units left in Russia, but they still have a lot of air assets. They've got like 8 Stukas and a medium bomber, and then 4 more fighters down in Kiev. And there's not really anything in southern Russia. Germany's going to be able to expand, probably be at the doorstep to Stalingrad after this current turn. Also down in Turkey, they're moving everything up, bordering with Caucasus, to be able to take that back. And also, because Russia's having to devote all their attention to defending Moscow, they did put 5 infantry down in Leningrad. But if Germany decides to make an advance on Leningrad with some of the mechs that are surrounding Leningrad, along with the air force they have, Leningrad will probably fall this turn. So Russia might be really holed up just into Moscow itself. Now, Moscow's defenses aren't the greatest right now because they moved everything out to launch that attack into Kursk. They've got 4 heavy armor and 3 medium armor, 2 fighters, and a air transport. The Germans did have 8 medium armor that moved up a couple of territories, so that'll make its way into Russia this turn. But I think because of the defeat in Kursk, Germany's going to probably have to spend some money on the Eastern Front this turn. I'm not sure they have the ground units right now to be able to make a push and successfully take Moscow. So that was definitely good news for Russia. As far as the Western Allies go, they made the big push into Spain. So as someone had commented last turn, in my last video, I had mentioned the U.S. transports could come over from New York and make their way to France. They couldn't because that would have been 4 spaces. Transports can only move 2, plus the additional movement allowance because of the naval facility. But that was still only 3 spaces total. So they landed in Spain. The British had landed first in Leon Castile. So they've got 11 infantry there, and then their entire fleet is there as well. A couple of heavy and light cruisers, about 4 destroyers, and a light carrier with a fighter. And then the U.S. went ahead, came up from Gibraltar, as well as came over from New York, and they went ahead and landed in Leon Castile as well. They've got a half a dozen infantry, a half a dozen medium armor, and then all of these naval units are in the 1C zone. There's just not enough room. So they've got a couple battleships, a couple loaded fleet carriers, 2 destroyers, and 3 light cruisers. The U.S. also, Patton led the charge into Madrid. So the U.S. Fighters and tactical bombers that were in Gibraltar came over along with 3 tanks and successfully took Madrid. They lost 1 light armor in the engagement. So now Spain is completely under Allied control, except for just 2 empty territories, which they'll take on this next turn. So the Allies finally made their push to get back into Europe and relieve some of the pressure off of the Russians. So the Allies do have quite a bit of units here in Spain. They'll probably start their push into France on this next turn. The only issue is, again, Germany's got the 5 fighters, the 8 mechs they put down, so those will probably make their way to Paris on this next German turn. And the Germans have like $85 or so to spend, so I'm not sure the Allies are going to be able to make a significant enough push into France to divert all of Germany's attention away from the Eastern Front, but it's the best they could hope for at this point. And it has had a little bit of effect. Again, this last turn, everything went onto the Western Front for Germany, so it's given Russia a little bit of a fighting chance. That's about it for the Allies on the European side. Also, the U.S. brought some naval units that were off of Gibraltar back towards the U.S. They're trying to make their way onto the East Coast here to pick up some units that the U.S. will eventually place in Washington and New York. Down in Africa, things less rosy for the Allies, going all the Axis way. Japan went ahead and spread out. They took a couple more territories, one from the Portuguese, so now they aligned with the Allies. They also took Belgian Congo from the British. They came over here and took the Gold Coast from the British. And now all of South Africa is pretty much under Axis control. The Allies are down to just the Free French capital in Cameroon. There's 4 infantry and 1 militia there, but I can see the Japanese coming in with these units from the Belgian Congo. They got a fighter off of this light carrier. They got these transports that can move around and drop units. So probably going to see the end for the second time of the game of the French here on this next turn. Italy came down, took Italian Somaliland back. They also took some transports, landed in Crete, even though it's not worth any money. Landed in Cyprus, took another dollar off the British, and then came over and moved into both southern and northern Iran. That took $3 total off of the Russians. And now from the Mediterranean all the way over to the Pacific as just a continuous line of Axis territories. Vichy France over here in West Africa, Italy all the way up through Iran, and then Japan picks up the rest of the territory all the way to the Pacific. So the Axis definitely having a lot of success there. And if you just look at the Mediterranean in general, Italy is pretty strong right now. They're actually up to $20, not counting bonuses. So just $20 worth of territory they have, so pretty good. They finished off a fleet carrier, a battleship, dropped down 2 destroyers. So there's really absolutely no danger of the Allies being able to get back into the Med anytime soon and challenge Italy. Italy also has a pretty decent air force. So I can see Italy going back for Gibraltar that's now wide open this turn. That was the consequence of the U.S. moving deeper into Spain. They pretty much had to give up defending Gibraltar. The British do go before Italy in this next turn sequence, so maybe they could come down and beef up Gibraltar a little bit. If not, Italy will probably take that back, and then this entire Italian fleet, both of these Italian fleets actually, will be able to make their way out of the Med and start causing problems in the Atlantic for the Allies. On the Pacific side of things, again, some more good news for the Allies. The Comintern, the Soviet Union, went ahead and declared war on Japan and invaded a vacant Japanese northern territory. Japan had to respond by putting an infantry down in Rihe. They also put a couple cavalry down in Calcutta and just continued to move units up the border here in Southeast Asia with the CCP. So I can see conflict coming between those two nations here on the next turn. The CCP, in turn, moved a bunch of units down here bordering Hong Kong. That's a stack of about 7 cavalry. So they're going to probably go after Hong Kong here on turn number 15. Japan also they bought 10 destroyers and put them down here in Sea Zone 56 to engage, just so the U.S. couldn't blockade the Japanese completely in the home islands. Someone had asked before why the U.S. didn't leave any ships here in Sea Zone 36 when they came over to 38. And just because I didn't want to take the chance, I thought it was going to be a pretty close thing between the Japanese and American fleets. So as the Americans, I didn't want to leave anything behind and weaken the U.S. chance of taking out that Japanese fleet. And it was successful. They completely wiped out everything Japan had in Sea Zone 38 the turn before. So then on this turn, the U.S. came over. They did this time leave a light or a heavy cruiser in 38, came over to 36 with their 6 damaged battleships. They had altogether 3 fleet carriers, a couple of fighters, a couple of tacticals, and a couple of heavy cruisers. And they took out the Japanese sub and 11 total destroyers that were in that sea zone, one that had come over on that turn as well, plus the 10 that they had bought, and they completely wiped out that Japanese fleet. They did lose all 3 of the fleet carriers, but not a big deal at this point. The main thing is now they have Japan blockaded, so that's going to severely restrict. Japan will only get income now from the home country territories. The U.S. did also buy 5 transports, 3 men, 3 tanks, 3 medium armor, so they're going to bring those over. The 2 extra transports are to pick up the 2 medium armor and the 2 infantry here in this northern Japanese island. So now the U.S. is going to try to actually land in Japan within the next couple of turns and try to finish off Japan altogether. Japan they do have a fleet here off of British Malaya, a couple battleships, a battle cruiser, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 subs, and a transport. So that's starting to make its way back. Most of those naval units had been over in the Indian Ocean from the naval conflict with the British off of Cairo. So they're trying to make their way back. That's probably enough to take out the U.S. because, again, all 6 of these battleships the U.S. have are damaged. But it's going to take a couple of turns for this Japanese fleet to make its way to the Japanese home water. So for at least 1, maybe 2 turns, they're only going to be collecting income from the home country territories. So that might be enough to give the U.S. an advantage to really degrade Japan for the rest of the game. They're collecting $52 in IPP plus bonuses in the wartime economy roll. So they got like $72 last turn. So they're going to be able to spend a bunch of money this turn, but then going forward until that blockade is lifted, only collecting money from the home country. And Japan's now going to have their hands full in Asia with both the Russians and the CCP, although the Russians don't really have a lot of units in these northern Japanese territories, so it probably wouldn't be much for Japan to push them out, but they definitely will have more of a issue with the CCP. Australia, again, didn't do much, but now that the Japanese have completely pulled away from Australia itself, they brought their little fleet down, so they are probably on this next turn going to take New Zealand back with a transport, a couple infantry, and their 2 fighters. So they're going to start trying to pick up some of these islands now that the Japanese have left unguarded, both in terms of ground units and naval units. So that's how things stand after turn number 14. I still think the Axis have the advantage. It might be a little bit too late, both in Europe and the Pacific. But the Allies do, along with their brother in arms, the Comintern, do have a little bit of life now heading into turn number 15.